This is a reaction video to Darwesh Patel's interview with Ilya Sutskever. I'm starting the video right now.
But I would not underestimate the difficulty of alignment of models that are actually smarter than us, of models that are capable of misrepresenting their intentions.
Are you worried about spies?
I'm really not worried about the way it's being leaked. We'll all be able to become more enlightened because we'd interact with an AGI that will help us see the world more correctly. Like, imagine talking to the best meditation teacher in history. Microsoft has been a very, very good partner for us. So I challenge the claim that next token prediction cannot surpass human performance. If your base neural net is smart enough, you just ask it, like, what would a person with great insight and wisdom and capability do?
So in the first 43 seconds, there's already a ton of very interesting information. He's not worried about weights being leaked. Weights are all the numbers underlying the models. That's interesting. He's basically saying, don't underestimate LLMs. He probably knows more. He probably knows how good they can be already. He has a lot of nuggets already that I'm sure will be addressed later in the video. My purpose is to find out what OpenAI is up to, follow them along as they make a journey, and I'll first start with reaction videos to get a bit of a feel of what are they actually saying, which might lead us to ideas of what they're working on. So let's continue with the video.
Okay, today I have the pleasure of interviewing Ilya Sutskever, who is the co-founder and chief scientist of OpenAI. Ilya, welcome to the Lunar Society.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
First question, and no humility allowed. There's many scientists, or maybe not that many scientists, who will make a big breakthrough in their field. There's far fewer scientists who will make multiple independent breakthroughs that define their field throughout their career. What is the difference? What distinguishes you from other researchers? Why have you been able to make multiple breakthroughs in your field?
Well, thank you for the kind words.
Some breakthroughs that Ilya has been at the head of is using GPTs with lots and lots more data. Another one is reinforcement learning with human feedback. Another one is fine-tuning models based on human input, similar to Wikipedia. So he's been on the forefront of many things, and I'm sure we'll do deep dive videos on all these things.
It's hard to answer that question. I mean, I tried really hard. I gave it everything I got. And that worked so far. I think that's all there is to it.
Got it. What's the explanation for why there aren't more illicit uses of GPT? Why aren't more foreign governments using it to spread propaganda or scam grandmothers or something?
I mean, maybe they haven't really gotten to do it a lot, but it also wouldn't surprise me if some of it was going on right now. Certainly, I imagine they'd be taking some of the open source models and trying to use them for that purpose. Like, I would expect this would be something they'd be interested in the future.
It's technically possible, they just haven't thought about it enough?
Or haven't done it at scale using their technology. Or maybe it's happening, but just don't know it.
Would you be able to track it if it was happening?
I think large-scale tracking is possible, yes. I mean, it requires a small special operation, but it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's some window.
That's interesting. So he's saying they can detect if at large scales a foreign government might be using their technology. And that makes sense. They would see traffic. They would see lots of hits. They would see them coming from the same places, things like that.
In which AI is very economically valuable on the scale of airplanes, let's say. But we haven't reached AGI yet. How big is that window?
I mean, I think this window, it's hard to give you a precise answer, but it's definitely going to be a good multi-year window. It's also a question of definition, because AI, before it becomes AGI, is going to be increasingly more valuable year after year. I'd say in an exponential way. So in some sense, it makes...
So he's saying that AI is going to become increasingly valuable over time. But he's also saying, and that's interesting, that AGI is years out. So we've heard some rumors on the internet that like AGI might be close or achieved or something like that. Ilya, who truly is an expert, basically says it's still years out.
I feel like, especially in hindsight, it may feel like there was only 1 year or 2 years because those 2 years were larger than the previous years. But I would say that already last year, there've been a fair amount of economic value produced by AI. Next year is going to be larger and larger after that. So I think like that is going to be a good multi-year chunk of time where that's going to be true. I would say from now till AGI pretty much.
Okay. Well, because I'm curious if there's a startup that's using your models, right? At some point, if you have AGI, there's only one business in the world, right? It's OpenAI. How much window do they have? Does any business have where they're actually producing something that AGI can't produce?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the same. It's the same question as asking how long until AGI.
Yeah.
I think it's a hard question to answer. I mean, I hesitate to give you a number, also because there is this thing where effect where people who are optimistic people who are working on the technology tend to underestimate the time it takes to get there. But I think that the way I ground myself is by thinking about the self-driving car. In particular, there is an analogy where
Optimistic people tend to underestimate how long it will take to get there. Realists like Sutskever know it will take years. It's also interesting how Patel basically says, like, once you achieve AGI, all other businesses will become naught. And I don't think that's necessarily true. People prefer interacting with humans. And for a long time, I think that will remain the case. And an AGI might be some kind of an overseer who helps us. But I do think that there will be many businesses where humans are at the center and AGI is just helping.
if you look at so I have a Tesla, and if you look at the self-driving behavior of it, it looks like it does everything. Like it does everything.
All right.
But it's also clear that there is still a long way to go in terms of reliability. And we might be in a similar place with respect to our models where it also looks like we can do everything. And at the same time, we'll need to do some more work until we really iron out all the issues and make it really good and really reliable and robust and well behaved.
By 2030, what percent of GDP is AI?
Oh gosh, hard to answer that question. Very hard to answer that question.
Give me an over under.
Reliability has been a big thing that Sutskever has been focused on. He often alludes to the fact that the models sound like they produce a very sensible result, but at the same time might be hallucinating, meaning producing incorrect facts. And self-driving cars are indeed a good comparison. It takes a lot to get there, and it always feels like we're almost there, and then for years we're not. And he's basically saying it's going to be very similar for AGI.
Like the problem is that my error bars are in log scale. So I could imagine like a huge percentage. I could imagine a disappointingly small percentage at the same time.
Okay, so let's take the counterfactual where it is a small percentage. Let's say it's 2030 and not that much economic value has been created by these LLMs. As unlikely as you think this might be, what would be your best explanation right now of why something like this might happen?
My best explanation. So I really don't think that's a likely possibility.
Yeah.
So that's the preface to
Right.
to the comment. But if I were to take the premise of your question, well, like why were things disappointing in terms of the real world impact? And my answer would be reliability. If somehow it ends up being the case that you really want them to be reliable and they ended up not being reliable, or if reliability turned out to be harder than we expect, I really don't think that will be the case. But if I had to pick one, and you tell me like, hey, like why didn't things work out? It would be reliability, that you still have to look over the answers and double check everything. And that just really puts a damper on the economic value that can be produced by those systems.
They'll be technologically mature. It's just a question of whether they'll be reliable enough.
Yeah, well, in some sense, not reliable means not technologically mature, if you see what
Having to look over the answers in the future will be pretty hard. You can easily imagine that there will be a situation where the AGI seems to be thinking in such advanced ways, and we say, like, oh, we just don't understand. It's just smarter than us. We don't need to review. But that is, of course, really not a good thing. And in the short term, having to review everything is just double work. So it's a big challenge.
Yeah, fair enough. What's after generative models, right? So before you're working on reinforcement learning, is this basically it? Is this a paradigm that gets us to AGI, or
Not
is there something after
reliable,
this?
is not
I mean, I
technologically
think this
mature.
paradigm is
We
going to go
love that.
really, really far, and I would not underestimate it. I think it's quite likely that this exact paradigm is not going to be the quite the AGI form factor. I mean, I hesitate to say precisely what the next paradigm will be, but I think it will probably involve integration of all the different ideas that came.
LLMs will go really, really far. That's what he's saying. In other words, it's already going really, really far. Otherwise, he wouldn't be that confident. The other reason why he's so confident is because they've got good statistics, OpenAI does, where it says that the more data we feed, the more performing the models become. And there's still a long way to go in terms of the data they can feed. They can feed visual information, pictures, videos, all these things they haven't done yet. Text can still go a long way, but these extra modalities and multimodal models is something for sure that will be valuable because our world is very visual. Humans are visual.
In the past.
Is there some specific one you're referring to, or?
I mean, it's hard to be specific.
So you could argue that the next token prediction can only help us match human performance, and maybe not surpass it.
This is super interesting. Integration of all the ideas that came in the past. We'll go deeper into papers that Ilya and his friends wrote. And a good example could be outside of their own realm, Q star, reinforcement learning in general, and many innovations that multiple companies have made. Like I mentioned, multimodal inputs, probably synthetic data. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all that comes together, and I'll try to implement some of those myself. So
it takes to surpass human performance.
So I challenge the claim that next token prediction cannot surpass human performance. It looks like on the surface it cannot.
Mm-hmm.
It looks on the surface.
Ilya says it's hard to be specific. It's the secret sauce of OpenAI, so they don't want to be specific. A couple of other things that I did notice is, for example, interpretability. I think they said it's 5 years out, interpretability, and they even gave a bunch of grants for him. So there's so many things that are in play, and he's clearly keeping his cards close to the vest.
Because if you just learn to imitate, to predict what people do, it means that you can only copy people. But here is a counter argument for why it might not be quite so. If your base neural net is smart enough, you just ask it like, what would a person with great insight and wisdom and capability do? Maybe such a person doesn't exist, but there's a pretty good chance that the neural net will be able to extrapolate how such a person should behave. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, although where would it get the sort of insight about what that person would do, if not from
the data of regular people? Because like, if you think about it, what does it mean to predict the next token well enough? What does it mean actually? It's a deeper question than it seems. Predicting the next token well means that you understand the underlying reality that led to the creation of that token. It's not statistics. Like, it is statistics, but what is statistics? In order to understand those statistics, to compress them, you need to understand what is it about the world that creates those statistics.
Predicting the next token means you understand the underlying reality. He's basically saying these models will synthesize the world. They will summarize the world, all the reasoning, all the thinking, and then start building from there. And you can say like, hey, imagine you're the smartest person in the world, answer this question.
And so then you say, okay, well, I have all those people. What is it about people that creates their behaviors? Well, they have, they have thoughts and they have feelings and they have ideas and they do things in certain ways. All of those would be deduced from next token prediction. And I'd argue that this should make it possible, not indefinitely, but to a pretty decent degree, to say, well, can you guess what you'd do if you took a person with like this characteristic and that characteristic? Like, such a person doesn't exist. But because you're so good at predicting the next token, you should still be able to guess what that person would do, this hypothetical, imaginary person.
Mm-hmm.
With far greater mental ability than the rest of us.
When we're doing reinforcement learning on these models, how long before most of the data for the reinforcement learning is coming from AIs and not humans?
I mean, already most of the data for reinforcement learning is coming from AIs. Yeah. Well, it's like the humans are being used to train the reward function, but then the reward function in its interaction with the model is
So
automatic,
now
and all the
switching
data
to
that's
reinforcement
generated
learning,
during the process of
one of the
reinforcement learning
specialties
is
of
created by
Ilya.
AI. So, like, if you look at the current, I would say, technique paradigm, which is been getting some significant attention because of ChatGPT, reinforcement learning from human feedback. So there is human feedback. The human feedback is being used to train the reward function. And then the reward function is being used to create the data which trains the model.
Got it. And is there any hope of just removing the human from the loop and have it improve itself and some sort of alpha go away?
Humans are used to create the reward function. The humans are flagging what's true or false, and the AI is trying to get to that answer by continuously improving what it learned. It produces a result. It says, "Oh, that's not right." It does it again and see if it can get to more reward. Humans fight, for example, say like try to get as close to the truth and false. That's the reward function.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like in some sense our hopes for like our plan, like very much so. The thing you really want is for the human teachers that teach the AI, for them to collaborate with an AI. So you might want to think about it. You might want to think of it as being in a world where the human teachers do 1% of the world and the work, and the AI do 99% of the work. You don't want it to be 100% AI, but you do want it to be a human-machine
So
collaboration,
there's
which teaches the
definitely,
next
he
machine.
says,
So
ways
currently, I
to
mean, I've
not
had a
have
chance
the
to play
human
around
in
these
the loop.
models. They seem bad at multi-step reasoning, and they have been getting better. But what does it take to really surpass that barrier?
I mean, I think dedicated training will get us there. More improvements to the base models will get us there.
Okay.
But like fundamentally, I also don't feel like they're that bad at multi-step reasoning. I actually think that they are bad at mental multi-step reasoning, but they're not allowed to think out loud. But when they are allowed to think out loud, they're quite good. And I expect this to improve significantly, both with better models and with special training.
Are you running out of reasoning tokens on the internet? Are there enough of them?
I mean, so okay. So for context on this question, like there are claims that indeed at some point we'll run out of tokens in general to train those models. And yeah, I think this will happen one day. And by the time that happens, we need to have other ways of training models, other ways of productively improving their capabilities and sharpening their behavior, making sure they're.
Ilya's talking about mental multi-step reasoning. It's true. Try this out. Try in ChatGPT, for example, try to explain your thoughts on any question. And if you ask it to explain its thoughts, it actually works way better. Or if you first ask it to break down the problem and then to explain or elaborate on each part of the problem, again, it does a lot better. So he's right. The models are already good at explaining their mental model and doing multi-step reasoning. You just need to ask for it.
Doing precisely what we want without more data.
You haven't run out of data yet. There's more.
Yeah, I would say the data situation is still quite good. There is still lots to go. But at some point, data will
Reasoning
run.
tokens are just
Okay.
examples.
What is the most valuable source of data? Is it Reddit, Twitter, books? What would you trade many other tokens of other varieties for?
Generally speaking, you'd like tokens which are speaking about smarter things, tokens which are like more interesting.
Yeah.
So I mean, all the sources which you mentioned, they're valuable.
Okay. So maybe not Twitter, but do we need to go multimodal to get more tokens, or do we still have enough text tokens left?
I mean, I think that you can still go very far in text only, but going multimodal seems like a very fruitful direction.
If you're comfortable talking about this, like where is the place where we haven't scraped the tokens yet?
Oh, I mean, yeah, obviously. I mean, I can't answer that question for us, but I'm sure that for everyone, there's a different answer to that question.
How many orders of magnitude improvement can we get just not from scale or not from data, but just from algorithmic improvements?
Hard to answer, but I'm sure there is some.
Is some a lot or is some a little?
I mean, it's only one way to find out.
Okay. Let me get your quick fire opinions about these different research directions. retrieval transformers. So just like somehow storing the data outside of the model itself and retrieving it somehow.
So interesting. Multimodal is obvious clearly to both, and there's still a lot of ways to go in text. That's quite interesting. You'd assume that they've already scraped all the text, all the valuable text, and yet there's still a ways to go. So that's kind of interesting. What I've heard is that they're actually hiring armies of folks to write a souped-up version of Wikipedia, asking experts, state questions, provide us the good answers, and that's probably what he's talking about.
Seems promising.
But do you see that as a path forward, or?
I think it seems promising.
Robotics, was it the right step for OpenAI to leave that behind?
Yeah, it was. Like back then, it really wasn't possible to continue working in robotics because there was so little data. Like back then, if you wanted to work on robotics, you needed to become a robotics company. You needed to really have a giant group of people working on building.
He's being a little cagey. He's clearly not giving away the secret sauce. How much is there from algorithms? He's like, I'm sure there's some. And it's probably like the economy. You don't want to lean on one thing. You want to push on multiple things.
Robots and maintaining them and having. And even then, like if you're going to have 100 robots, it's a giant operation already, but you're not going to get that much data. So in a world
Rags are
where
promising.
most of the progress comes from the combination of compute and
Retrieval
data,
transformers.
right? That's where we've been, where it was the combination of compute and data that drove the progress. There was no path to data from robotics. So back in the day, when you made a decision to stop
Moving
working
on
on
to
robotics, there was no path forward.
Is there one now?
So I'd say that now it is possible to create a path forward, but one needs to really commit to the task of robotics. You really need to say, I'm going to build like many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of robots and somehow collect data from them and find a gradual path where the robots are doing something slightly more useful, and then the data that they
Compute from
get from
Microsoft.
these and then the data that is obtained and used to train the models, and they do something that's slightly more useful. So you could imagine this kind of gradual path of improvement where you build more robots, they do more things, you collect more data, and so on. But you really need to be committed to this path. If you say, I want to make robotics happen, that's what you need to do. I believe that there are companies who are thinking about doing exactly that. But I think that you
Tesla's
need to
training on
really
YouTube
love
videos.
robots and need to be really willing to solve all the
Training
physical and
robots on YouTube
logistical
videos.
problems of dealing with them. It's not the same as software at all. So I think one could make progress in robotics today with enough motivation.
What ideas are you excited to try, but you can't because they don't work well on current hardware?
I don't think current hardware is a limitation.
So first get data from YouTube.
I think it's just not the
and
case.
then have the
Got
robots
it.
train on their own
Anything you
mistakes
want to try, you can just spin it up.
and give them a good
And
reward.
of course, like the thing you might say, well, I wish current hardware was cheaper, or maybe it had higher. Like maybe it would be better if it was higher memory processor bandwidth, let's say. But by and large, hardware is just a limitation.
Let's talk about alignment.
Yeah,
Do
robots
you think
take
we'll ever have
space,
a
they have
mathematical
actuators.
definition of alignment?
Mathematical definition, I think, is unlikely.
Uh-huh.
Like I do think that we will instead have multiple, like rather than achieving one mathematical definition,
Money is a
I
limitation,
think we'll
not
achieve
hardware.
multiple definitions that look at alignment from different aspects.
There we go.
And I think that this is how we will get the assurance that we want. And by which I mean, you can look at the behavior. You can look at the behavior in various tests,
Memory processing
in
bandwidth,
various adversarial stress situations.
not GPUs.
You can look at how the neural net operates from the inside. I think you could have to look at several of these
Alignment
factors at the
is about
same
making
time.
sure the
And how
AI
sure do you
does
have to
what we
be
would
before
want
you
it to
release
do.
a model in the wild? Is it 100%, 95%?
Well, it depends how capable the model is. The more capable the model is, the more higher the more confident you need to be.
Okay, so just say it's something that's almost AGI. Where is AGI?
Well, depends what your AGI can do. Keep in mind that AGI is an ambiguous
Multiple
term also.
definitions.
Yeah.
Like your average college undergrad is an AGI, right?
It's
So-
debatable, yeah.
But you see what I mean. There is significant ambiguity in terms of what is meant by AGI.
Mhm.
And so depending on where you put this mark, you need to be more or less confident.
Well, you mentioned a few of the paths towards alignment earlier. What is the one you think is most promising at this point?
Like, I think that it will be a combination. I really think that you will not want to have just one approach.
Mm-hmm.
I think people want to have a combination of approaches where you spend a lot of compute to adversarially probe it to find any mismatch between the behavior that you
AGI
want it
is
to
an
teach and the
ambiguous
behavior that
term.
it exhibits. We look inside into the neural net using another neural net to understand how it operates on the inside. I think all of them will be necessary. Every approach like this reduces the probability of misalignment. And you also want to be in a world where your degree of alignment keeps of increasing faster than the capability of the models. I would say that right now, our understanding of our models is still quite rudimentary. We made some progress, but much more progress is possible. And so I would expect that ultimately the thing that will really succeed is when we will have a small neural net that is well understood, that's given the task to study the behavior of a large neural net that is not understood to verify it.
By what point is most of the AI research being done by AI?
I mean, so today when you use Copilot, right? What fraction? How do you
Multiple
do the
paths to
how do you
avoid
divide it
misalignment.
up? So I expect at some point you ask your, descendant of ChatGPT, you say, hey, like I'm thinking about this and this. Can you suggest fruitful ideas I should try? And you would actually get fruitful ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right? And I think that will make it possible for you to solve
improve
problems you couldn't
faster
solve
on
before.
alignment than
Got
the
it. But
models
it's somehow
improve. That's
just
going to be
telling the
pretty
humans,
challenging
giving them
because there's
ideas
almost no
to
investment in
faster or
aligning.
something. It's
That's
not
one
itself interacting with the.
one example. I mean, you could slice it
Solving.
in a variety of ways. But I think the bottleneck there is good ideas, good insights, and that's something which the neural nets could help us with.
Mm-hmm. If you could design some like $1 billion
Research done
prize
by
for some
AI,
sort of
inevitable.
alignment research result or product, what is like the concrete criterion you would set for that $1 billion prize? Is there something that makes sense for such a prize?
It's funny that you asked this. I was actually thinking about this exact question. I haven't come up with an exact criterion yet. Maybe something that with the benefit, like maybe a prize where we could say that 2 years later or 3 years or 5 years later, we'll look back and say like that was the main result. So rather than say that there is a prize committee that decides right away, we wait for 5 years and then award it retroactively.
But there's no concrete thing we can identify yet as like you solved this particular problem and you made a lot of progress.
I think a lot of progress, yes. I wouldn't say that that would be the
Good ideas, good
full
insights. The
thing.
neural network could help with.
Do you think end-to-end training is the right architecture for bigger and bigger models, or do we need better ways of just connecting things together?
I think end-to-end training is very promising. I think connecting things together is very promising.
Everything is
Nobel
promising.
Prize for alignment.
So OpenAI is projecting revenues of $1 billion in 2024. That might very well be correct, but I'm just curious, when you're talking about a new general purpose technology, how do you estimate how big a windfall it'll be? Like, why that particular number?
I mean, you look at the, we've already had we've had a product.
That's always true for Nobel Prizes.
For quite a while now, back from the GPT-3 days, from 2 years ago through the API. And we've seen how it grew. We've seen how the response to DALL-E has grown as well. And so you see how the response to ChatGPT is. And I think all of this gives us information that allows us to make a relatively sensible extrapolation to 2024. Maybe that'd be one answer. Like, you need to have data. You can't come up with those things out of thin air, because otherwise your error bars will be like off by
everything's promising, connecting things
error bars
end-to-end
are going to
training.
be like 100x in each direction.
I mean, but most exponentials
These
don't
are
stay
good hints at
exponential,
what AGI
especially when they get into bigger and bigger quantities,
might
right?
need.
So how do you determine in this case that?
I mean, like, would you bet against AI?
Not after talking with you. Let's talk about what like a post-AGI future looks like. So are people like you, I'm guessing are working like 80-hour weeks towards this grand goal that you're really obsessed with. Are you going to be satisfied in a world where you're basically living in an AI retirement home? Or like, what is the word? What is like what are you concretely doing after AGI comes?
I think the question of what I'll be doing or what people will be doing after AGI comes is a very tricky question. I think where will people find meaning? But I think that that's something that AI could help us with. Like, one thing I imagine is that we'll all be able to become more enlightened because we'd interact with an AGI that will help us see the world more correctly, or become better on the inside as a result of interacting. Like, imagine talking to the best meditation teacher in history. I think that will be a helpful
Betting
thing.
against AI.
But I also think that because the world will change a lot, it will be very hard for people to understand what is happening precisely and how to really
An
use it.
AI retirement
One
home.
thing that I think some people will choose to do is to become part AI in order to really expand their minds and understanding and to really be able to solve the hardest problems that society will face then.
Are you going to become part of AI?
Very tempting. It is tempting.
AI will help with
Well, do you
meaning
think there'll be
of
physically
life.
embodied humans in 3000?
3,000. Oh, how do I know what's going to happen in 3,000?
Like, what does it look like? Are there still like humans walking around on Earth, or have you guys thought concretely about what you actually want this world to look like?
3,000. Well, I mean, that the thing is, here's the thing. Like, let me describe to you what I think is not quite right about the question.
It's an
Like, it
interesting
implies,
example, the
oh,
best
like
meditation
we
teacher.
get to decide how we want the world to look like. I don't think that picture is correct. I think change is the only constant. And so, of course, even after AGI is built, it doesn't mean that the world will be static. The world will continue to change. The world will continue to evolve. And it
People
will
will
go through all
become
kinds of
part AI.
transformations. And I really have I don't think anyone has any idea of how the world will look like in 3000. But I do hope that there will be a lot of descendants of human beings who will live happy, fulfilled lives where they're free to do as they wish, as they see fit, where they are the ones who are solving their own problems. Like one of the things which I would not want, one world which I would find very unexciting is one where, we
It's
build this
interesting.
powerful
So
tool and then the
first
government said,
cyborgs,
okay,
then
so
maybe not
AGI
embodied at
said that
all.
society shall be run in such a way, and now we shall run society in such a way. I'd much rather have a world where people are still free to make their own mistakes and suffer their consequences and gradually evolve morally and progress forward on their own through their own strength. See what I mean? With the AGI providing more like a base safety net.
How much time do you spend thinking about these kinds of things versus just doing the research that?
I do think about those things a fair bit. Yeah, I think those are very interesting questions.
So, in what ways have the capabilities we have today, in what ways have they surpassed where you expected them to be in 2015? And in what ways are they still not where you would have expected them to be by this point?
I mean, in fairness, they did surpass what I expected them to be in 2015. In 2015, my thinking was a lot more, I just don't want to bet against deep learning. I want to make the biggest possible bet on deep learning. Don't know how, but I will figure it out.
But is there any specific way in which it's been more than you expected or less than you expected? Like some concrete prediction you had in 2015 that's been trounced?
Unfortunately, I don't
So
remember
no
concrete predictions that I made in
autocratic
2015. But I definitely
society from AI.
think that overall, in 2015, I just wanted to move,
Self-actualization.
to make the biggest bet possible on deep learning. But I didn't know exactly. I didn't have a
AGI
specific idea
providing
of how
base
far things will
safety
go
net.
in 7 years. Well, I mean, 2015, I did have all these bets with people in 2016, maybe 2017, that things will go really far. But specifics. So it's like, it's both the case that it surprised me, and I was making these aggressive predictions, but I think maybe I believe them only 50% on the inside.
Well, what do you believe now that even most people at OpenAI would find far-fetched?
I mean, I think that because we communicate a lot at OpenAI, people have a pretty good sense of what I think.
He
And
bet
so,
on deep
yeah, we
learning.
reached the point at OpenAI where I think we see eye to eye on all these questions.
So Google has, its custom TPU hardware.
Interesting.
It
Models have
has
come
all this
further.
data from all its users, Gmail, and so on. Does it give it an advantage in terms of training bigger models and better models than you?
So I think like when the TPU came out, I was really impressed and I thought, wow, this is amazing. But that's because I didn't quite